we recording?
Yes.
No, like I said, I love it. That is one of the great joys of being at the seminaries. We get to have these sorts of conversations, and I kind of thrive on it, which might be why God's put me there. I am Bill Johnson. I'm the Chief Information Officer at Concordia Theological Seminary, Fort Wayne, CTSFW, Fort Wayne, whatever you want to call us. It's all good.
I'm Rebecca Allersmeyer. I'm the communication specialist there.
All right, so and what we are dealing with today is the idea of changing your congregation's story, changing up the narrative in order to enable them and empower them to see themselves a little bit differently than the story they're telling. And what this grows out of, and I want to be clear up front, there is this theological topic we talk about called the performative word. It's big words to say, God said, let there be light, and there was light. You know, it is that God's word changes reality. That when God speaks, what he speaks is true, not simply because God can't tell a lie, but because his word actually defines reality. We tracking with that? That is this concept of performative word. That is not true of human beings. Except it kind of is. and that's the challenge. I want to make sure we're not, I'm not saying human beings have the power to speak and redefine reality. If we could, I would have a whole lot more Teslas in my garage and all kinds of fun things happening, but that's not a thing. But instead, the truth is that the words we speak do matter. They do help determine what happens because those stories matter. You've all heard the stories over the years, I'm sure, of the kids in elementary school, and it's happened over and over and over, where the test results are read wrong. And a group of kids that were underperforming get told, no, you're really geniuses, and they go through a year or two of being told this story and being taught at this level, and they exceed. I mean, they go ahead and perform at that level, only to discover they were never really that bright to begin with. Well, what happened? The story changed. Yeah, we got it here. Yeah, we're good. The story changed. Instead of being that lower class who can't perform as well, they were told a different story about themselves. They were treated a different way, and they performed a different way as a result, with no difference in their actual ability. And this has happened over and over and over. I didn't bother to look up the instances because I've seen so many over the years that it is an undeniable reality. And we've seen it, I'm sure you've seen it in your own lives. The kid whose parents, always called him stupid or clumsy or whatever, or the one, that is always intelligent, always gets pushed to that next level. Those stories have a way of becoming self-fulfilling. The same is true in the church. When I was a vicar long ago, I was assigned to a church in Gainesville, Florida that I adore. It's a wonderful congregation. We had 2 pastors, a vicar, a DC intern, a full-time secretary, a part-time secretary, a full-time minister of music, a part-time worship director, and custodial staff, and it was amazing. We could do all kinds of things. My very first act as a vicar was actually to book a rock concert for the local college, and it was so much fun. And I went back to seminary, and I went through 4th year, and I got to call day, and they sent me out to Zion Lutheran Church in Newnan, Georgia, which I also adore. Broke my heart to take the call to the seminary and actually leave there. But it was different. It was this little country church on a hill. And they had, when I started learning about the congregation, learning about their past, if I went back far enough into the past, they had actually been on district subsidy as a mission for 20 years. Yeah, now for those who aren't familiar with that process, if you're a mission plant, you're on district subsidy for 2 years, maybe 3. If you're not self-sustaining by the end of 4 or 5 years, district's saying, you know what, you're kind of on your own here. It's not working. And we start looking at other, mission opportunities. Well, somehow they had fallen through the cracks, the paperwork hadn't happened, whatever happened. And so for 20 years they were on district subsidy, And then 20 years later, after them, kind of living with that, district came to them and said, hey, look, you're on your own. We're cutting you off after this year, which is absolutely what district should have done, 18 years before. But it changed the story. Instead of being the little country church on a hill, suddenly now we're this little country church on a hill the district doesn't care about anymore. And when I got there, it was a good decade later, actually, from the events here. And when I sat down with the congregation members and I would talk to each of the families individually, none of them told that story. All of them would tell you that, no, the area is growing. We're one of the hottest real estate markets outside Metro Atlanta. We've got young families. We've got great youth program. We've got good children's ministries. All of these things are really working. But when they got together collectively, the story was, well, we're just this little church in the shadow of the great big Baptist church behind us and the Mormon church down the road and all these, and there's just not much we can do. And I have to admit, from my point of view, I actually spent a couple years there, year and a half or so, working through that vicarage experience. Because I got there and said, okay, I'm the pastor, awesome. Who is, all right, there's no associate. Do we have all right, we don't have a youth leader. All right, can I meet the organist? Well, we don't have one of those. We use CDs. Okay, can I meet the custodian? Well, we don't have one of those, but here's where the mop closet is. And so I spent a good 18 months or so going, wow, if I only had this, we could do that. If I only had like a really wealthy donor, we could do a rock concert, and like I did on Vicarage, and that would be awesome. And I went through over and over and over trying to figure out, what I could do if I only had whatever. Well, God has never called me to be accountable for things He hasn't given me. And it took me far too long to realize that. And so we started a very concerted effort to work with the congregation to very intentionally figure out what we could do. But I wish I could tell you this is some great big success story, and it's not. The congregation could not let go of that story. They were always the little country church on a hill that district forgot. And when I took the call to the seminary, district brought in several revitalization folks. They tried everything they knew how. And in the end, what happened is the congregation closed its doors. All because the story never changed. And so that's what we're unpacking today, is how do we take the stories our congregations are telling? What are some practical things that I wish I'd known then, wish I'd had the experience and wisdom to know, and how do we then apply them to our congregations, our stories, our families even, to change the stories we're telling, to change the direction things are going. So with that, we're going to kind of tag team back and forth here and smooth transition here.
So I wanted to talk about what your story is. There's several, whether it's you personally or your family's story or your church's story, there's layers to your story. But if I asked you who you are, what would you say? I'm picking you out of the group and, putting you on the spot.
Well, we've only been at this church for a year and a half, but I can tell you what they would say is that we're not that church across town where they broke off from.
Oh,
years
yeah.
ago.
Oh, so they're defined by what they're not.
There's a lot of, I feel like we have that ourselves too with Bill was saying, if I only had this, I could be doing this. If I could only be a little bit more organized, a little bit more, efficient, or a little bit more on top of it, I could have done this. So I think between us personally, even within our families and then within our congregations, there's a lot of that, that sense of identity. I think all of our problems, or at least the majority of them, come from this sense of mistaken identity, that we don't know who we are. That if we really owned and knew who we are in Christ, think about, there wouldn't be regret, because God works for the good for all the, I'm like misquoting it now, but in all things God works for the good of those who love him, who've been called according to his purpose. So what do I have to regret? God's working good through this. I've asked for forgiveness for everything, and that's gone. So like shame, any of that sort of thing, fear. If we fully knew who we were in Christ and we own that identity as a chosen child of Christ with the Holy Spirit in us, there's nothing that we couldn't do. Sorry, the screen went dark.
Oh. Sorry,
I couldn't get it back up, sorry.
No worries.
But there is an author, John Arthur Nunez, who wrote Meant for More, In, With, and Under the Ordinary. And he put it as the reclamation of identities and cultures is necessary and consistent with our Christian heritage. So reclaiming our identity is essential. It's part of our heritage. It's who we are. And also, I had this quote from C.S. Lewis from Mere Christianity. We all love C.S. Lewis. But your real new self, which is Christ's and also yours, and yours because it is his, will not come as long as you are looking for it. It will come when you are looking for him. Does that sound strange? The same principle holds, for everyday matters. Even in social life, you will never make a good impression on other people until you stop thinking about what sort of impression you're making. Look for Christ and you will find him, and with him everything else is thrown in. So I love that idea of seeking Christ because he is our identity. He's who defines us. Because we may frequently find ourselves in a position where we feel we need to defend our faith, we forget that it's not us who need to validate God, it's God who validates us. So sometimes we feel like because some of our principles are under attack in the world that we have to defend all these things, but God is the one who validates everything. We're already validated. Alvin J. Schmidt wrote, they knew that it was not their faith that validated Christ's resurrection, as many of today's modern theologians will teach and preach, but that it was his physical resurrection that validated their faith. And he wrote How Christianity Changed the World. And Bill is talking about changing the story that you tell.
All right. So I actually get the easy part here because we actually all just spent the last year and a half, 2 years living through watching two different stories play out at the same time. And it has been amazing to me. I manage a team at the seminary of about 10 people. And I had people in there when this whole thing started even. I had a certain percentage of the people that I work with and know and love that were absolutely convinced that this was the end of the world as we know it. The world would never be the same. We were all going to end up locked in our houses forever, and that was the way the world was going to be. I had a certain percentage on the other side that were absolutely convinced that this was no big deal, this is why we have immune systems, and any kind of shutdown or precautions or masks or anything was frivolous and stupid and possibly even a government conspiracy. And so, we should resist all of that. And we had both in the seminary, which is by and large a pretty, unified institution, in the same building, in the same department, watching the exact same set of facts unfold in front of them, seeing two completely different stories. And you've all seen it. I'm sure you've got those people in your life. I debated even putting this in there because I am so sick of talking about it, quite frankly. But it's important just because we've seen that happen. And so figuring out how to change that storytelling framework, how to get people to see the world a little differently, and we're slowly starting to see that, at least in my building, and I'm seeing folks kind of relaxing a little bit on both sides of that, so I'm thankful and hopeful, and we'll continue to pray, because God's got to do that, not me. But seeing the way those stories change the way we approach our world is so very important. To get there, though, we've got to do a few things. First of all, we have to be realistic about who we are. We have to own the reality that Zion in Newnan, Georgia was a little country church on a hill. We worshipped 30 people, 40 people on a good day. 100 on the rolls. It wasn't destined to become a mega church. There was no Six Flags Over Jesus waiting for us here. That's not going to be a thing. All right, so own that. That is realistically who we are. And starting from that, take a look at the story that you want to tell and evaluate, is this story just pure mysticism? I mean, is this, I'm thinking I'm going to believe this thing into this huge mega church? It's not magic. And God's not magic. God does amazing, miraculous things, and I in no way want to deny that. But simply sitting around and telling the story of how this little 30-person church gathering on a Sunday morning is going to turn into that, and particularly in unrealistic ways, doesn't help anyone. That's not a thing. Goals need to be realistic. The story we tell has to be believable. On the other side, it doesn't need to be fatalistic. And that was the story they had embraced, that it didn't matter what we tried. We weren't going to grow. We were always just kind of destined to be that same group of families in that same place. So that balance between those things is key. The story has got to be a positive one. It's got to be a good one. I mean, that's the direction we want our churches to go. But it's also got to be believable, and it's got to be true. So, alongside that, then, how do we start to use the techniques of storytelling, the techniques of reframing, to start to pull people out of what they're seeing and get rid of this gap in worldviews, or to even then bring people into an entirely new worldview? Well, part of that is the consistent story you're telling. If that's on a Sunday morning, that's how you're framing it from the pulpit. It is easy to talk about the size of the church or all the things you can't do. It is more difficult to talk about, well, here's where we made a difference. And it doesn't really matter that that's a big thing or not. And I want to unpack that a little more, but I'm going to jump over your story if I don't stop
fine.
here, so I'm going to stop here.
I was going to talk about starting with little, visible, tangible things because people really latch onto those especially. There was a woman that I worked with that for some reason we just didn't mesh. I usually mesh pretty decently with people, but we were just kind of butting heads. I seemed to irritate her, and I thought, I was doing good work. I was, on time and doing my job, and I was baffled, and we were kind of always annoyed with each other. And then one day I just started looking at the ways that I could change little things about what I do to be more in line with the way she does things. Because she'd been there for 15 years, I think. And they weren't big changes. They didn't change anything, like I wasn't giving any moral ground. It was just leaning in with a little more respect and trying to feel out where I could make some changes. So I did, and little by little, I started doing all these different things just a little bit differently, and she started warming up to me a little bit. And actually now she's one of my best friends. We're really close, and it turned in from the story of this kind of, some people call her mean, like kind of abrasive person that nobody knew how to get along with, that she's just kind of mean, but she opened up to me and started telling me her story. It's really kind of tragic. Her two sons were murdered by her husband, who committed suicide. So she had all of this grief that she was dealing with on her own. And she was just trying to do her job the way she knew how to do it. And there's all these annoying, newbies coming in and bugging her. And that was her story. But the whole thing changed by starting with these little tangible things that we could see and we could do. And I ended up getting to know this awesome person. We shared faith together. She's really, really great. So I liked that was possible to change that story. And also with little tangible things when it comes to a congregation, there is a lot of the writing the check versus having the time, because there's a lot of things that people would like to do, and sometimes it's easier to just kind of write the check and call it a day. There's a book by Greg Finke called Joining Jesus on His Mission. Yeah, it's a good one. I really like it. How to be an everyday missionary. And he says the key to joining Jesus' mission is realizing that we don't have to find a way to come out of our hectic lifestyle in order to have a missional life. Our hectic life is our missional life. So it's about seeing who's already there and taking advantage of that opportunity.
All right, well, actually, I'm going to put you on the spot because I remember a story you told me not so long ago about when you were working at the church cappuccino bar.
Yeah.
And you had this one customer. Tell me about him.
I was a barista. We had a church that also had a cafe with it. And there was a guy, kind of curmudgeonly, that would come in every day and always be unhappy with his cappuccino, but would still keep coming in and ordering the same cappuccino even though it was like bad every single day. So I would make it for him every day, and I'd try to be that perky barista and say like, have a great day. But he was always just kind of grumpy and mad at me, and I was like, okay. And then one of the days I was just like, okay, well, obviously he knows what a good cappuccino is. So I asked him, I'm like, teach me, how can I do this differently? Because obviously you've been around, you know what makes a good cappuccino. So little by little, I kept trying. It was over so many different days because he's like, nope, this isn't quite it. I'm like, I'll get there one of these days. And like, so he kind of started laughing. Like he liked that I was bumbling through trying to learn how to do it differently. And he started opening up to me. And he walked with a cane, and I found out he was a war correspondent that had gotten injured. He had this whole epic life story. And it was funny. I had this sweet lady that I worked with, and she's one of those that's always coming at like, how can I pray for you? Like the church lady. And she came up to me one day and she's like, how did you crack that nut? I've been trying for weeks. And it was just stepping out of because usually when customers are rude or like it happens all the time. Like service people are kind of a punching bag, more or less. And you can get annoyed by it, and that can be the story. Like they're just a rude customer. Or I could look at it and look at how I can respect him differently and view and change little tangible things with what I do. And it turned out to be a really, really cool thing.
Well, and what I love about that story is it starts to point to those directions that we can use for our congregations as well in changing up that story. And it doesn't start with some big revolution. There's no way to take the overarching narrative of your congregation and suddenly make a left turn, right turn, whichever political direction you want to go, and do it all at once. That's not a thing. Instead, it starts with small things. And so if I had the chance to work with Zion again today, I'd find something in the community that we could do. We can't, fund the food bank. We can't, do the big, massive, huge community outreaches that touch everyone. But I'd look for, okay, it's a hot day. Can 4 or 5 of us go downtown and start passing out some water? Just because. Just give it away. What can we do to be visible, to be a positive force, to be a blessing to our community? What are the small ways that we can begin to reach out beyond our walls and start to make a difference? Because it's those things that are really going to be the path forward. One of the things we talk about in counseling is that the exception to the behavior is your key to breaking through that behavior. So if somebody is always depressed except when they're fishing, well, okay, what's different when you're fishing? Well, nobody's yelling at me. Okay, well, now we've got something here. What's going on? How do we dig into that a little bit? All right. The exception is your path towards a cure, and the same's true in the congregation. Those small stories, those small differences where you can start to make an impact, and those are then the stories you can start to retell and start to celebrate. Those are the things you absolutely want to do. And I think it's worth touching on kind of our conversation at the beginning that many of you walked into, kind of debating back and forth. We don't want to do this in a way where we're promoting ourselves. That's not the key. What is God doing through us? Because God is always at work through his people. That's the reality. Whether we see it or not, whether we understand it or not, whether we comprehend it, because we don't, God is always going to be at work through his people. And so finding those small places where we can point out and say, no, look, through us this happened. If we aren't here, this thing doesn't happen. That's not a thing. And so how do we find those small changes that we can begin to make, begin to celebrate as God's work through us? Not, how great we are and some of those things we were hitting on. I don't want to go there. But to start to really take those small things, those small exceptions to the story, and start to lift those up and magnify them so that people start to see what's going on behind the scenes here. So, Tag, you're it.
People, and when it comes to empowering people in your church, people will want to do what they know how to do, and especially what they know how to do well. There was, when I was at Trinity in Lisle, Illinois, there was a creative director there. He's a pastor now, but Tony Diekman. He came up to me probably the first day that I visited, and just in that conversation, he was asking about my interests, the things I could do. I like to paint, so he was like, well, you could help us paint backdrops for the contemporary service. I'm like, cool. And I like to write. He's like, well, you could help write the liturgy. We're doing this, or the bulletin. We're doing, and I'm like, cool. And then for every single thing, I was creative minded, so I got to be on the church's creative planning team for services, helping pick what music brought out different Bible verses and things like that. So just in one conversation with this guy, like my first conversation with this guy, he had already connected me to 4 different ways I could serve, at least. I think it might have been 5. And also a small group. And I said, as long as, as long as you want me to, I can do it, sure. And it was amazing. I had never been in a situation where I'd been able to use my gifts in so many ways to serve the church. And it was so empowering. And I guess it had never occurred to me until somebody came up to me and said that to me. I could have been doing that before. I could have had initiative, but sometimes it takes that ask or that invitation, and you can be that kind of person to have that impact. We also did, there's a book called The 3 Colors of Ministry, A Trinitarian Approach to Identifying and Developing Your Spiritual Gifts by Christian A. Schwartz. And this was what we did at the church as a congregation, and we... it's a survey that you take to find out where your gifts are. And then we had little small breakout sessions with people at the church to help connect you to the next steps in ministry, and kind of, here's your contact person, here's, your next steps, here's the next thing we're having, we want you to come, and it was amazing the way the church came alive with people being involved with things that they felt good about, and also seeing, this is how I can use this to serve the church. It was really, really cool. It was really empowering. And I loved that idea of seeking people out that way. 3 benefits that they talked about from it. It helped every church member discover his or her gifts. Some people don't think they're good at anything. Some people think they're great at everything. and ensuring that all the gifts are related to concrete tasks. And then establishing gift-based ministry as a long-term strategy as you're telling that story of your church going forward. And no one is calling you to be what you're not. That's the other thing that I think a lot of people have this idea of, there's a one-size-fits-all for what your church is supposed to be, who you are supposed to be. You always see the pretty shiny one, but nobody's calling you to be that. You are called to be who you are. And everybody has the ability to impact others in some way. You will lead with your actions. So having the insight, seeking people out, and inviting them to use their gifts in that way is really empowering. I'm tagging you.
All right, fair enough. Well, and one of the things I want to talk about, when we start talking about a successful church, what does that mean? Actually, I'm going to turn that question to y'all. What does that mean? What does a successful church look like?
Place in which God's kingdom is done or God's will is done and God's kingdom comes.
Yeah.
Or through which.
All right.
Through which.
I think you need to go back earlier. I don't think you've yet covered what a church is.
Okay. So, tell me some more about that.
What is a church? Well, I would say it's a collection of individuals gathered together to help each other grow their faith in Christ, in order to develop a feeling of fearless joy. So there's nothing on earth or in heaven they ever have to feel, and by illustrating the fearless joy they have, they will attract other people to join them, and they will grow the church.
Okay.
I like that fearless joy.
So
Yeah, I like that image.
it has nothing to do with a building on the hill. It has nothing
Yeah.
to do with a building on the hill. They could be meeting in the desert or on the beach or wherever. When I was in Vietnam, our surgical hospital was under a tent, and I used to teach students how to be health administrators. And I said, what is a hospital? And they would tell me about a building. I said, that's not a hospital. And I showed them a picture of a tent. And I said, no, that's not a hospital. I said, that's the 18th Mobile Army Surgical Hospital. We saw thousands of people all the time. That's a hospital. A hospital is these people interacting, people who are trained to help each other people accomplish something. So that's what I would say is, you know, let's sit down and talk about what a church is before we worry about the building. Okay, now what's our first obligation? First obligation is to help each other grow our faith. It's not about to go do anything in the community. It's to help each other grow our faith so that we can have this sense of fearless joy. Okay, are we doing as much as we can with that? Well, what else can we do to help each other grow our faith? No, nothing about a building. Nothing
Yeah.
about, okay, where can we meet to do that? Oh, my barn, you know, I'll come out in my barn, we can put some space heaters out there, I'll turn on the hot stove or whatever. We'll hold it out in the barn. I mean, it's having them understand
Yeah.
that the church is about beliefs and relating to each other. And I think the best biblical passage is John, to be in the world but not of it. A church is not of the world. The building is of the world. The church is not of the world.
Yeah, well, and I think you've hit on something very important there. It is so tempting in ministry work to view success in terms of, did we have the big building project? Are our numbers trending in the right way? I got to say, one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in ministry is build as a last resort. Because a building project inevitably sucks the congregation's time and money and attention away from ministry and internally focuses it. There's no way around that. You've got to do that to successfully build a building. That's why you see so many mission plans.
Getting off track, right?
Yeah, a little bit.
I'm sorry. I'm here to hear about rewriting our story.
Yeah, fair enough. And so the piece I want to pull from that is the idea that numbers are an easy metric and a really bad one. They don't reflect success in ministry, and so don't measure your story in terms of numbers. That's not the way to go. Not every church is called to be a megachurch. Not every church should be a megachurch. It's not the way of it. I think, honestly, as we look at the direction the world is going, the direction our society is going, your mid-sized church that is well connected to its community is much, much better positioned for the next 10 to 20 years than your megachurches are in a lot of ways. Because they've been able to build those stories and build those connections with the community. You look like you have a question or a comment.
No, I want us to get back to the track.
Oh, this is
because-
part of it. Yeah, we were talking.
Really talking about this, okay, good.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that the
we're
story
talking-
of
Keep on story.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Because part of it is that some of us think that like the only good churches are the big, huge churches with the big, huge buildings, and that's the story we tell ourselves. It's actually part of our notes, so it does seem like we got off topic, but it is part.
Yeah, no, and that's a very intentional direction because, like I said, I know at least as a pastor, that is always my temptation is to judge the success of this session by how many people showed up. Well, that's not accurate. Knowing that God works in small things as well as big things, and that we can take and celebrate those small things. And in fact, God's word commands us, do not despise the small things, says the Lord. That's one of the best things I got on vicarage. I had a Bible study and didn't have very many people show up, and I went to my senior pastor just beat up about it. He's like, wait, you had like 5 people show up to hear God's word and receive his gifts. What are you upset about, man?
Yeah.
And yeah, exactly. And realizing that, it doesn't have to be a stage and a spotlight. It needs to be faithful service, connecting people to God, to his gifts. And that's the critical part of the story that's so easy to lose sight of. So I'm going to tag you in on that next part.
Yeah, there's a book called Mindsets by Carol S. Dweck. And she talks about cultivating a growth mindset based on the belief that your basic qualities are things you can cultivate through your efforts. And a person's true potential is unknown and unknowable. It's impossible to foresee what can be accomplished with years of passion, toil, and training, and I would add, and faith with God. Studies show that people are terrible at estimating their own abilities. In the people Dweck studied, those with a fixed mindset accounted for almost all the inaccuracy. So just as I was talking about before, seeking out people and helping them discover their gifts, we usually are our own worst judge of our own gifts. So coming together in partnerships with other people and helping us see what God is doing through us or what God could do is really important. And when you succeed, whatever success looks like, which is, of course, preaching God's word and being faithful to it and supporting our people and doing what we can to show Jesus' love to the world. When we succeed, it's important to ask, what do I have to do to maintain and continue the growth? Because it's easy to see that if we got to a good point, that, hey, we're good now, and we don't need to keep making these intentional efforts because we've made it, we're here. And so one of the things is staying on that and making sure that you keep asking those important questions, you keep being intentional, and you keep that growth mindset, that you need to keep moving forward and keep growing.
Real quick before we get there.
Yeah.
I want to touch on, because we kind of talked about, starting on those small things, beginning there, continuing not to define success with numbers, define success by the work God has given you to do within your community. But then also on the other side of that, learning to celebrate success. That's why we're all here. I don't know if you realize or not, depends how plugged in you are to our wider synod. We in the Missouri Synod do not celebrate success well. I understand there was a day when it was true that we did. I don't remember ever living through that day. In fact, it kind of feels for me, and this may be the seminary point of view creeping in, and I'll totally own that. It feels like if you're successful, I've got to figure out what kind of heretic you are. Because if you're doing, if you're growing and doing well, then you must be doing something weird, right? And that's just not true. We're here because it's fun to celebrate success. It is fun to look at what other people are doing and see how it's working and how God is working through them. And the same's true in the congregation. So when those little efforts do bring success, lifting that up and being able to tell that story over and over and over and share it and celebrate it, because that's what we're called to do. The church, irregardless of the building, in its place and time, is a part of the Missio Dei, is a part of the mission of God, the story He is telling in this place. And we are part of how He is reaching out to our community, reaching out to the lost, reaching out to those who've walked away from the church, and reaching out through us. And that's the story that we've got to continue to tell over and over, to continue to do the work that God has set before us as His people in this place and time. And so it becomes this feedback loop where you're doing the small things, you're seeing even very limited success. It doesn't matter. We're just looking to change the trajectory of the story overall. Celebrate that, continue to reinforce that, and use that energy, that enthusiasm, that success to feed back into, okay, that was awesome. What do we do next? How do we keep the ball rolling this way? All right? And I cut you off before the Bible verse.
No,
I'm sorry.
Fine, but it also made me think I was recently rereading the Screwtape Letters. I don't know if you guys have ever read
good
that.
stuff.
It's very, very cool. I love how it points out how much we're always under attack by Satan. I feel like especially in ministry, especially when you're onto something good, that's when the lies creep in. And when we believe them, where it wasn't that good, we could have done better. My talk wasn't that great. I stumbled over a bunch of words. There's all kinds of things that I think being very conscious of that all through the process is so important, because the liar's always there to try to snatch your joy, to try to snatch any momentum you have, to try to steer you off course of the mission God put in front of you. So I think it's really important to be mindful of that and be in prayer, and also to cast him out loud if you need to. I do it all the time. But the verse that we had that we were talking about was, "For this reason I bow my knees before the Father, from whom every family in heaven and earth is named, that according to the riches of his glory he may grant you to be strengthened with power through his Spirit in your inner being, so that Christ may dwell in your hearts through faith, that you, being rooted and grounded in love, may have strength to comprehend with all the saints what is the breadth and length and height and depth, and to know the love of Christ that surpasses knowledge, that you may be filled with all the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do far more abundantly than all we ask or think, according to the power at work within us, to him be glory in the church and in Christ Jesus throughout all generations, forever and ever. Amen.
Amen.
There's so many good things in that.
Ephesians 3.
Ephesians 3, verse
Yeah.
14 through 21. Yeah. There's so many good things in this, so many things about our identity, the power through your spirit in your inner being, the fact that he lives and dwells within us at all times. And we can't comprehend the breadth of what he can do. It's beyond what we could ask or think or imagine. That's one of my favorite verses in the Bible. And I think a lot of times with the celebrating of the things that we do well, he's already in your own lives done way more than you could have asked or imagined. Sometimes it's hard to point out the little miracles that happen every single day in our lives, that God is working. And that when you think about where you used to be, or like when you were struggling, when the bank account was super low, when I thought that I was not going to make it in whatever capacity, and maybe you're in a struggling space currently, but we've all been there, and look at what he did. Look at where we are now. We're in fellowship at this really cool place. And did you think that you would be in the place that you are now when you were, at a different spot in life? So it's important to remember that he's continuously doing more than we could ask or imagine. And that needs to be part of our story, that it is, God can do all of these things through us. And did you want to, I felt like you were jumping into.
No.
Okay.
You're rolling. I'm staying out of your way.
But yeah, so that's one of the things I love about this verse, and I think it's very important in our storytelling within the congregation, within our families, within ourselves, that God has that power to do more than we could ask or imagine. So that was...
All right. Well, that's kind of what we had prepared to talk about, but I'm sure there's more stories here. Thoughts, questions, comments, ways we can be helpful.
Yeah, we kind of wanted to see where the stories were with your current congregations or yourselves or your family, like where it was that you're looking to change the narrative currently. I know you were saying, you were talking about we're not the big church.
Well, we've come, my husband's, this is his second call. The first call was definitely, they're both church splits.
No,
And the one,
it's hard.
his first call was, they still hadn't forgiven or let go. And we are not that church. And there was a lot of bitterness and anger, even still 20 years later. And, I think trying to change the story for, for them to get out of who they are not, who are you?
Yeah.
And I think there was a lot of healing to take place. How did we do that? I don't know that we created healing. I will tell you, it got a little hairy for a while, and those who didn't want to change left.
Yeah.
And they blamed the pastor. Pastor's like, well, this was all going on before I stepped in the door.
Yeah.
But, one thing he took on with the council, trying to reformat how they took care of their church instead of running it like a business, trying to get them to look at it as a ministry. And he took them through a program called Rooted Experience. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's more formulated for bigger churches in more urban areas. Well, we're in small town Wilson, North Dakota at the time. A church of 70 people maybe worshiping, so you dumb it down,
Yeah.
and you make it work in a rural area. And we did a Bible study with them. And it was so neat to see how their own personal spiritual walk came out. We had to get that out first.
Yeah.
And once that came out, their perspective on how church was supposed to be changed.
Yeah.
And then of course, other things took place. We're not there anymore. The Lord called us to Iowa, and it wasn't them kicking us out or anything. We just felt we did what we're supposed to do there. Somebody else can pick up the pieces, and we thought the church was going to die. And they did too, because getting a pastor up in Williston, North Dakota is not easy. Who wants to move their family up into no man's land and not pay them very well? But they ended up getting another pastor in town from another Lutheran church denomination who was looking for a church building, and they ended up converting to, and they ended up merging, and there's a whole different story starting to take place. And, and you look back, and it makes me emotional to see the changes that they've implemented. And I think their original story will always be a part of them,
Yeah.
but it's been really neat to see how their mindset of who they are is changing and starting to blossom a little more when we thought they were going to die.
Yeah,
That's awesome.
and that's one of those challenges, at least for me as a pastor, and I suspect for all of us, is knowing that my work here in this place and time is just one piece of the story. That things have come well before me, and things will come after me, and God will continue to work in this place long after I'm not here anymore. And holding on to that, because that's a word of hope. That's a good thing. I love that.
I think what I've gotten out of this is we talk a lot about, because we're kind of dwindling into death almost. We're starting a visioning process tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. So I'm excited about that, but I think our identity has been, well, we used to have this, but now we don't. Oh, we used to have this, but now we don't. And instead of celebrating what we do have and what missional activity we're working on, it's like, well, we just do this now.
Yeah.
And instead of celebrating it, we're minimizing what we're doing. And I think the story is the problem.
Yeah.
We're telling a story of where we've come from instead of where we're going.
Yeah, and it's so important, especially from that evangelism mindset. I don't know, like, anything I feel like I have to apologize for, I'm not inviting friends to.
Oh, yeah.
You know?
I
And
totally
if
agree
it
with
is that story of, well, we used to do this, but now we can only do that, We used to have a coffee bar with 6 varieties, but now we've only got 3. I know I'm just making something up there, but if that's the story and the viewpoint I'm approaching with, then I'm not taking you there. I'm sorry, we've only got and whatever's after the only doesn't matter.
Yeah.
But each of those sentences you could cut in half. Like, now we have this,
Yes.
now we have this,
Exactly.
now we
Yeah.
have this, and this is the opportunities in front of us.
Yes.
And this is, nobody cares what, I'm not saying, of course you care about who you used to be as your story, but like, where are you now? And nobody
Right.
cares that you don't have these things.
Right?
Especially if they're coming in fresh and not even
Right.
knowing
They
you ever
didn't
had
even
them.
know that.
Yeah, they'd only know if you told them.
Right.
And they probably would never notice or never care. Yeah, so it is hard to
And
let
I've caught myself doing it, when we have visitors, I'll say, well, we used to have a praise band. And I'm like,
Well, sometimes I think we don't know how to grieve the losses.
yeah, I think that's part of
I
it.
think you're right.
That with the and with the splitting of a church to what you used to have, and when there's difficulty, I think we just are geared toward, okay, now we're this new thing, we're moving ahead, but we don't take time to grieve all of
Yeah.
those losses, and we need to grieve, and that's what helps us let it go.
Mhm.
So giving people space to grieve and letting yourself grieve it too, because it's okay to be sad that you don't have it anymore, but then you grieve it a little bit and then you let it go and focus on what you currently have.
Even with church splits, you'll find that what their story was at that church tends to come right along.
Oh, yeah.
To the same story in the new church. And you're like, this is new.
Yeah.
We are not our redeemers across town. We are Light of Christ. Who is Light of Christ? Or who is Faith Lutheran? We don't need to be better than that other church over there. We're all God's people.
Yeah, you need to be
Yeah.
who you
So
are.
it's really tricky.
Yeah.
It
And we're
takes
not
a
in
lot of
competition.
patience.
Well, especially coming out of a church split where it is very much that mindset of we're reacting against what we've left and defined by it. You've got to heal that. I think grieving is a great word. You kind of got to grieve through that process. And from that then figure out, okay, well then who are we rather than who are we not? And I think you're on exactly the right track there.
The church we're at now, they have a little bit of that. I think they have healed, maybe not completely healed, but, they still have a little bit of that. We're not St. Paul's across town. We're better than them. We're going to
Yeah.
And we're like, no, we're not taking something from them that they're very good at in this town. We're going to find something that we can do
Mhm.
and either bank off that and, work together somehow, but we're not taking that program from them. It's cheap stealers.
Yeah, well, and sort of relatedly, I'll make it super quick. When I first got to the Fort Wayne Seminary, I'm a St. Louis grad. They still tolerate me. It's all good. Everything I heard was, well, St. Louis does it this way. Which is fine. I'm awesome. St. Louis does really cool stuff. That doesn't mean we have to immediately implement and try to play catch up. Because it created a mindset and an identity that was always us one step behind as the little brother kind of tugging at the coat trying to be included. And instead we started on a path where we said, okay, but what do we do? And it's worked pretty well. I mean, we've kind of achieved this place where I think we've got at least some parity going on. So,
It takes patience and time.
Yeah, it definitely does.
yeah.
For sure.
So I heard you ask, what are our stories? And I
Yeah.
think we've got 12 stories here. I'd like each of us to take 2 minutes to tell our stories.
Yeah.
Can we do that without any feedback from you guys?
Oh, yeah, sure.
And, or maybe just affirming feedback, but not, because I feel like we're not hearing all the stories.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
love that
Is
idea.
that, yeah, that'd be great.
If everybody else is open,
I mean, anyone who was
Share mine.
Yeah.
Right, I mean, it's great, and I'm glad that we've heard more in depth on two, but we've got, yeah.
Yeah. Do you want to start with
Oh.
Mr.?
My name is Megan Kroom. We moved to the desert. I actually lived 30 minutes from here a year ago. Well, a little more than a year ago. We moved with 2 teenagers during a pandemic. My husband's a pastor. I'm a Lutheran school teacher, but I teach in public school right now. 16th year in ministry, 3rd call. We moved to a congregation that's newer. It's 15 years old, brand new building, beautiful. Worship about 350 on a weekend, and I only include that number for this reason. It's really a group of retirees. We probably have about 15 families or younger couples. The church for a long time, they built a building that's ready for like youth to be in it, but our youth numbers are really small. And so when we came, they said 2 things. One, we would like to grow our family ministry. Awesome. And they talked about all the things they don't do well, although like they have a great budget and they have tremendous outreach and great community for people who are retired or newly retired. But they tell the story that we're not good at family ministry. So we're doing some things to change that. But one of the things my husband's also encouraging them to do is to like lean into their strengths. Because not every church has to have a robust youth program. Right? Like they're really great at retirement ministry and bringing their friends to church, and they really love that. We also have a deaf ministry. We have about 20 members who are deaf. And so sometimes I feel like we talk about all the things we're not, but we don't like strengthen the things that we are. Because it's okay to be really great at like a handful of things and really like minister to that group of people. Because you can grow in that too. Like,
Yeah.
so we're calling a DCE intern. We're getting a DCE intern in June.
Awesome.
We're taking some leaps of faith that way. Talking about small steps. You know, we have a handful of families. So one of the things we did last year is we started doing Facebook ads for youth things, which was awesome. We had like 250 kids show up to Trunk or Treat. But then we didn't have a plan to invite them to the next thing. So we said, how are we going to do this different next year? Well, we're going to invite them to we're going to invite them to VBS this year. We're going to do that same Facebook campaign. Super simple, cost like $11 and 250 kids showed up. We're going to invite them to VBS this year. And then at the end of July, we're going to do a Fill the Backpack event. Now this is all without a DCE. I mean, we haven't planned any of this with the intern yet. We just have been saying like, hey, how can we serve our local community who isn't as well off as the members who go to our church? So we're going to fill backpacks and we're going to pray over backpacks right before school starts.
Love
And
that.
then when we fill backpacks and pray over backpacks, we're going to invite them to an indoor movie that we're going to have in September. And then we're going to invite them to Trunk or Treat again. And then invite them to Christmas services. Small steps. We're making cheap magnets that have all of our committed dates on it to it so that families can stick it on their fridge. But small steps. We're not doing anything crazy outside of the DC intern, which was a huge leap of faith. And I've talked over 2 minutes, so I apologize.
That's nice, that's
But
That was
tiny
awesome.
steps, right? Like tiny
Right.
steps. And we'll see if God, we got a lot of things going on. And we're planting seeds, so we'll see.
Right.
I don't know.
Awesome.
Can we hear your story?
Well, it's interesting. I'm sitting here thinking I don't know what the story is, but I've heard a lot of comments from the people in the congregation, like, well, we could do this, but we don't have a big enough sanctuary. Or, yeah, we could hold something in the parking lot, but we don't have a big enough parking lot. And, you know, we could do something else, but the kitchen doesn't pass code. And to me, that sounds like, gee, you need a different place to worship. You know, if those are the things you want to do, our facility doesn't support our mission. So my pastor asked me to serve on the governing board, which I've studiously avoided. And I think the reason he wants me to is because we do have to establish a new narrative of where we're going. You know, things that we're doing well, but what's our future narrative? So as I hear all these things, you know, we can't do this, we can't do that, I'm thinking, gee, what do we do well? We have a preschool. It does very well. We've got more people that want to be in it. I guess it's early childhood education. It starts at 6 weeks. We do that very well. Lots of people want to be in it. So I guess I'm going to ask the question, what do we do very well and what do we want to do? Rather than saying, well, we can't do this because the sanctuary is too small, or we can't do that. So I'm catching this from what you're saying, so.
Very cool.
Yeah.
At a previous church that we were a part of that was much smaller than our church now, we also had a preschool that did very well. My husband intentionally got to know those families. Like, we'd be out for pizza and a dad would come up and put his arm around my husband and be like, this is my pastor. They've never been in our
that's
church
right,
before.
right.
But like, their kid went to our preschool. One of the things that we started doing to build relationships, because we also couldn't do a lot because of space, was one Saturday a month we started something called Dates with Dad, where dads would bring their preschool kids to our church and we would do something small for those preschoolers and their dads. Because dads don't often like rub elbows or get to know each other or have friends. But that could be something that you could do in your space. We would just do a small activity with preschoolers. We just called it a Date with Dad. And we just started to bridge the gap between a preschool and the church by doing that. And it was really good. It
Very
was a
cool.
good thing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Awesome.
I'm going to respectfully skip.
Oh, you're fine.
Good morning, my name is Paul Hoffman. I attend a church about 30 minutes east of here. Our congregation 2 weeks ago just celebrated 60 years, so that was kind of the story at that time for the last year or so, prepping for that and talking a lot about things that happened. In 2020, though, we have a 2020 vision, and part of it was embracing our neighbors with unexpected love and so forth. So the area we're at, 60 years ago was a great thriving area in East Mesa with families and so forth. Currently, it's a little bit lower area, I guess you would say. So we kind of went with the approach several years ago about if our doors weren't even open, would anyone even care or notice, because so many of our people had moved away and were coming 20, 30 minutes away to the worship. So we tried to be more impactful for our community right in the neighborhood. So we've done a variety of things. We have very nice facilities and so forth, but we didn't have kids and families necessarily to use them. Preschool closed like 10 years ago, but now we have a charter school that's there on campus 5 days a week. And so we embrace them, invite them to different activities, functions that we have. We do the Produce on Wheels once a month where they come and get produce, and we provide that to their families and stuff like that. So we're just trying to embrace the neighborhood. We do Care Portal, which is helping kids that kind of are through the social services that need things, beds, diapers, whatever. So we have a very giving congregation as far as resources. So and it's an older congregation, so they're willing to donate time, money, and so forth to do the activities. So we're just trying to go in the community. We're just currently working with a nonprofit called Sleep in Heavenly Peace, where we go and do bunk bed builds. So the thinking behind their project is no kid in your town will be without a bed. So we have teams that go out generally on Saturdays and deliver and build bunk beds for them. So a variety of things. Do we have a great youth group? Yeah, not necessarily by numbers. Do we, that kind of thing. But we're trying to be impactful on the community. And we're not a large, we have a fair amount of winter folks come out and maybe worship about 300 or so on a weekend. So it's not, I guess you could say a medium-sized church. But we're trying to change the narrative. The focus was kind of, here's what we did. We used to do that. Oh, we had a preschool, but now we do have a school there. They're paying rent. We use the facilities. Family Promise is on site. We have there where families stay there during the day and then leave at night to stay at other churches, but we have a facility there that they're using. So we're trying to utilize the facilities that we have and reach and be impactful in the community. Sorry,
Very
went out a
cool.
little bit.
No, that's cool.
Good stuff.
I'm a member of Grace Lutheran Church in Pensacola, Florida. We have a somewhat unique challenge. We have anyone who goes through flight training in the Navy goes through Pensacola, Florida, because that's where all the flight training. So we have a lot of military people who are there for a short period of time and then move on. And so we have the challenge that we need to engage people instantly and also connect with people instantly and try to build relationships early on. And it's, we also have a challenge in that we have a university close by, and so we're looking now to try to come up with new ways to connect with those people, which we don't feel like we've always been very successful at doing. But I think our church has had some great ministers, and we built a pretty strong foundation, and then we went through a very difficult time. And not to dig old dirt, but during our vacancy is when I think we really found out who we were. And our service during our vacancy, the minister that was serving us during our vacancy started to say at the end of every service, we don't just go to church, and the congregation responds, we are the church. And I think that just that Sunday reminder just gives you an entirely different mindset as to what the church is really all about. So many churches focus on the minister, and he's the one that determines the trajectory of the church and all that stuff. And when you change the focus that you are the church, you're part of this, it gives you more of a responsibility as to where your church is going. It also gives you, I can't shove this off on one person because they're paid, or multiple people because they're paid staff members. I have to, I gotta stand up for my church as well. And so we've come up with a lot of community service things that we've done in the past. We've had a sunrise service downtown at a memorial that's right along the water. That was pretty well attended a couple of times that we had it. And we do a backpack ministry for children that are not for school, although we have done that in the past too. But it's for children who are food challenged over the weekends. And so we put together, and that has become really successful. But I feel like in our programs, the one thing that people miss is that when you have somebody who takes on a program, or multiple people who take on a program, it seems to me that the success of the program is that you've got the commitment, you've convinced the congregation why this is a good thing to do.
it's very organized. It's, you know what's gonna happen, you know how much it costs to sponsor a child for a semester. They keep you informed of the numbers, because the numbers are constantly changing due to the paperwork that the families have to fill out, and changing schools and all that stuff. And if you're kept along that road, if you know what's happening with that program, people are more than willing to back it up and keep it going. And we find that with a lot of other programs as well.
This is an example of what I remember I learned in Sunday school. I mean, it said, why do all of these things happen to us? Because they're an opportunity to build your faith. And so this congregation did use this opportunity to actually come out stronger. And that's what we're supposed to be doing, is to build our strength when all of these issues come up. It's an opportunity for the congregation to pull together and move forward. That's what I think we should be being taught is, you know, this is just another test. It's an opportunity to grow your faith stronger. You can overcome anything. You can overcome any fear. And then go project that fear, that joy of having overcome those. And that will attract people. Say, who are those people? Why are they so happy? Well, they can overcome whatever you throw at them.
So I'm telling a story about a nonprofit that I'm part of, because that's why I came here. I just recently became the ministry catalyst of International Student Ministry. We encourage congregations across the U.S. to reach out intentionally to international students studying on public and private university campuses. And when I joined, the organization was kind of on a trend, and they were wondering, you know, do we stop or do we keep going? And so I'm really thankful that God has put me here, but I'm both trying to learn the story of the organization from before, and then trying to figure out who we are, because we're a network of churches, none of which answer to me, but I'm there to encourage all of them, as well as to encourage new congregations like you guys to potentially reach out. Well, no, but I don't think you guys are reaching out to international students in Pensacola. So I'm like, I got all excited when I heard you guys are so close to a university. But anyway, and so I'm trying to figure out, well, one thing I've heard is that there's some people who say, oh, well, that church shouldn't be listed on the webpage anymore because, you know, they're not doing the real thing. So part of my job is to figure out, well, how do I say who we are as International Student Ministry? And I tend to be a very inclusive person rather than, I don't like boxes so much. But anyway, so that's why I came. One of the things that I wanted to mention was that I really believe that Philippians 4, is it 4, 8, and 9, are really important ones as we talk to others. And I think that part of what we all have to do is think about how do we go back to other people in our congregations. And so there's two things that do I still have a minute or not? One is, so Philippians 4, 8, and 9, finally, brothers and sisters, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any moral excellence, if anything is praiseworthy, dwell on these things. Do what you have learned and received and heard from me and seen in me, and the God of peace will be with you. And I think that if we all become people that are focusing on being appreciative, that will really go far in helping others in our congregation also be willing to change our story. And being appreciative of what God has done, being appreciative of what individuals have done. And the other thing is that there's a facilitated discussion called appreciative inquiry, where you start out as a group talking about what are all the good things that are happening. And then after that you say, well, what are we, and then you take time to give God thanks for those things, and then you say, well, let's just brainstorm. What are all the possible things that God might want us to do, building on these good things that are already here? And that helps keep us away from because we don't have a big enough parking lot, right? But from what we've got, what does God want us to do? and brainstorming those. And of course, they're gonna come up with more than you can possibly, you say, we're not promising to do any of these. And then you take some time to think, well, which of these are most important and which can we start doing first? But it's really helpful, the trained facilitator leads that, and, anyway, but it's a really fun thing. I'm happy to talk to any of you about that if you're interested.
Very
Next
cool.
story.
Retired pastor. I served in a community in Northern California for 20 years. Left there and went to the Bay Area for 12 years and then retired. Went back to this same town in Northern California because my in-laws live there. And the church had another pastor who had taken membership from 285 to 55.
Oh my goodness.
And these people just started to, well, they got a part-time pastor, and he died, you know. So you can imagine the narrative that they're struggling with right now. And we are finally at the point where they have begun to design a new narrative, and not unrelated to the last one, but with some new twist to it. But that old story just keeps eating away at them, and it's very, very hard for them to get past it. But just a matter of time and allowing God to do His work.
Do you have a story?
I think our biggest story, the thing that we're trying to change right now is we want all these programs, and we know, we have a pretty decent sized church in the school and an early childhood center, and everybody wants all these programs, but nobody wants to take responsibility for them, or more than willing to give money, but nobody wants to help. And so, there are people like me who are part-time, who are there all day long, and then for my kids' activities, and then to work events, and we're quickly gonna burn people out. So.
That's hard.
Right. And, yeah, can I just share one, the appreciative inquiry discussion, one of the things is we ask, well, who among the group who's here in this discussion will take on responsibility? And there's a pastor I heard who always said, if somebody came with a good idea, does anybody know what that guy says?
They chair the committee.
Oh,
Is
no,
my
this-
usual
no,
responsibility.
This guy comes up and
Yeah.
says, I've got this great idea. And the pastor says, that's a really good idea. What would make it a really great idea is if you would take on leading that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It either goes forward or it flops.
Yeah, it's just that, hey, we need a stronger youth program.
Right?
But we just want to drop our kids off here on Wednesday nights and you go. And it's
Right.
like, oh, okay,
Right.
cool.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's where inviting them in and helping them realize that they have gifts to contribute, because they all do,
Yeah, like you were saying.
right? And, but so many of them feel like, well, they could never do it as well as whoever they knew, right? And, yeah.
Doesn't matter.
But that's where, if we're appreciative, if we talk about the good things that, the good gifts that they have.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think our bigger issue is, well, I'm real busy.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
I got 3 kids too.
Yeah. We're all pretty busy.
Sometimes I think one of the things that helps that is we've tried to really adopt you're not volunteering until Jesus comes, you're volunteering for one event. So when we do like a season kickoff, we will say, hey, here's what's happening from September 1st to December 31st, right? Like, and we do this in July. Sign up for sign up for something that speaks to you the most. We need this many volunteers under each of the categories, but you sign up one time. Because we feel like people today in this life can't sign up, like, I can't do this every single
Too much of a
Sunday,
commitment.
right? But they can do it once. So maybe, I know it's a little bit of an adoption, but like maybe if signups look different, does that make sense?
Yeah.
You have more events outside of just Sunday school. That way people like you, I can't do it all the time, but I can sign up to do something in September and something at the end of November. but not every week.
I know you were saying your church had a lot of things that but there's probably more to your story. You kind of told it a little bit, but you said there's things that you didn't have.
Well, we're kicking off this visioning thing, and I'm appreciating all the ideas of things and how people have dealt with that to kind of focus. I think that's what we need right now is some focus, because our numbers have dwindled, so we don't have the people to sign up for anything.
Yeah.
I mean, we got 20 people.
Right.
You know, and
Yeah.
those 20 people can't do 5 programs
No.
because we've got to narrow a little bit for now and, you know, get out in the community. I think our community, meshing with our community is gone. Our community has totally changed. We used to be one ethnic group, and now we're a totally different ethnic group, and everyone, like someone else said, is driving in to our church because we don't live there anymore in that area. So there's a community connection that we're missing, and there's a focus thing I think that we're gonna have to work on.
Yeah, that's hard for sure.
And a little bit of the volunteerism too. You know, people are willing to, bring to, an Undie Sunday or something like that, but they're not going to be the person to head it up, put up the signs and make the announcements and that kind of stuff.
All right, who's left? Did we skip you or just? All right. Yeah, please, what's your story?
And everything else.
All right,
Okay.
fair enough.
Very good.
All right, well, thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you.
And, yeah, appreciate especially sharing your stories.
Just
So-
before you go, if you
yeah.
wanted to do this on your phone, this is the resources page we have for everything we referenced. Actually, in all of our talks since we've been here. And it's also, if you don't have a smartphone, it's ctsfw.edu/BPM22. So that's where you can find some links. We also did a presentation about a communication audit and email targeting, so all those links are on that page if you want to look at them.
You have a